Hello and welcome to the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast. Before we start today's show, an important announcement you must not skip past. From the start of England's series in Pakistan on October the 7th, we are launching our own new Patreon account with 3 membership options, all of which are available to sign up for now. For £5 a month, we'll be giving you the Wisden Bronze package. That includes an additional weekly show every week that will be slightly different to our usual weeklies. There'll be an interview series called In the Bubble, where a big name from the game sits down with Joe Harmon to look back at their careers to date. There'll be Q&A style mailbag episodes, historical deep dives. We'll pick weird 11s, and there'll be a few shows in the spirit of Ben's news cycle column that MAG subscribers will know well. You'll also get daily podcasts after every day of England men's and women's international cricket, hitting your feeds an hour or so after the final ball is bowled. For marquee series like the Ashes or England versus India, there will be live, interactive Q&As after each day's play.
And this is just the second package?
I'm still going on the first one. Subscribers will also have access to the Patreon community function, which is essentially a direct group chat with us in them. Then on the Wisden Silver package for £7.50 a month, we will bring you everything in the Bronze package, plus free access to the digital version of Wisden Cricket Monthly, a discounted subscription to the print version, so £21 off the recommended retail price of $59.50, and 50% off any Fairfield Books title, the publishers that brought you Lara, The England Chronicles, and Being Geoffrey Boycott. And if you really want to show your dedication to all things Wisden, you can get the Wisden Gold subscription for £11.50 a month to get you as close to the team as possible. This will give you everything in the first 2 packages, plus access to a virtual live event each month featuring some of the podcast team. These will be Q&As, quizzes with prizes, panel discussions, things of that nature. So to sum up, if you pay nothing, you get exactly what you get now, our 2 weekly shows. If you pay £5 a month, you get an extra weekly show and a daily show reacting to every day of England men's and women's international cricket and all the other Patreon community benefits. For £7.50 a month, you get all of that plus the WCM and Fairfield discounts. And then for £11.50, you get all of that plus an interactive monthly live virtual show with an assortment of myself, Ben, Joe, Phil, Katia, Butch and Lauren. We've got really high hopes for it. And to give you a flavour of how much we're giving you, it's something like an extra 21 podcasts in October alone. And that's just on the Wisden Silver tier.
Someone's got to do it.
Yeah.
Please do sign up. This is the game changer.
Yeah, please do.
I'm really looking forward to the England-West Indies ODI dailies at sort of 3 a.m. in the morning. Could be some loose stuff on there.
Yeah, will the conversation will that be, recorded and out there for public consumption, or can we really let loose on the Discord or whatever you call it?
Well, there's stuff on the Patreon is just for those people who subscribe to the Patreon.
Right. Okay, noted.
What happens on Patreon stays on Patreon,
except when they're screen saved. Okay.
Anyway, on with the show. So we've got the England-Australia ODIs, Surrey's 3rd county championship title in a row, and some gripping international cricket in Sri Lanka, India and the UAE. First up, you'll hear from Butch on England's win last night in Durham. Butch, given the defeats in the first 2 games and the nature of the criticism after the first and second game, that was a really important win for England.
Absolutely, yeah. Harry had obviously come under a bit of fire, almost as a hangover from the Test match series, but also as a new captain, and his slightly, how can I put it, guileless comments after the loss in the second ODI, which I think were taken a little bit too literally. They weren't taken out of context. He said what he said, but I think the idea that nobody cares is not something really that is for public consumption. I think he was talking about they're not going to get very upset about that mode of dismissal in the dressing room. But of course, you're paying fans and people who want to see England win the games are, of course, going to care. And he'll learn from that as he goes along. Be a little bit less Yorkshire in his in his bluntness, or just sort of dress things up a little bit. Part of being a leader is that you have to You have to use a little bit of diplomacy when you're talking post-match, and you can't sort of go out there and speak as you would do among the group in the dressing room, to the press, because things will be taken literally, and you will get hung, drawn, and quartered for them if things don't go very well. So, brilliant for Will Jacks and brilliant for Harry Brook. Harry Brook, in response to the sort of stick that he got after that press conference. And for Will Jacks as well, because the whistles were beginning to start. Well, is he just somebody that goes out there and has a slog for 6 or 7 overs in the T20s, and is that the sort of limit of his skill and worth? Both of those guys sort of stood up and played quite brilliantly to get England way in front before the rain came down in Durham.
Just on the criticism around those comments from Brook, first of all, how important do you think it is for an England captain to be mindful of how they present themselves publicly? And two, from your own playing days, because I don't get the sense that Ben Stokes has sleepless nights over how he'll word things in a press conference. And I guess just like back in your playing career, was that something you think that the captains you played under spent a lot of time considering?
Well, I think so. I think sometimes there was too much guardedness. A little bit more honesty here and there would have served everybody much better. But I think there's a difference between, language is incredibly important, albeit that the internet and 140 characters has kind of rendered that idea a little bit redundant. But I still think that the words that you choose and the way that you construct your sentences is an important thing in terms of how people can then construe the messages that you're trying to get across. So I just think that Harry on that occasion was just a little bit loose tongued. Really, I don't think he really meant that nobody gives a crap if England win or lose. That's not what he meant. I think he was talking more in terms of the how should I put it? More in terms of the sort of like the consequences walking back into a dressing room of getting caught on the boundary edge, as opposed to the consequences of sort of losing matches and having the crowd be perfectly fine with you tossing your wickets away. I think those two things are very different. And he didn't choose his words carefully enough to emphasize the point that he was making, or at least he shouldn't have said it at all. That's fine. You keep that to yourselves, and you dress it up in a different way in front of the press. And all of these things, you're fine when you win. You say what you like when you're winning, but when you lose, you have to show a little bit of contrition. And at least pretend that you're learning lessons along the way, rather than going out there and sort of shooting from the hip and saying it doesn't matter, nobody gives a stuff, which I guarantee you is not what he meant.
I thought it was an important win, not just because they'd lost quite a few and are struggling in ODI cricket more generally over the last year, but it was also the manner of it. As you say, an important knock for Jacks. That was Brook's first 100 in ODI cricket as well. There's one over in particular that I thought really backed up what this group of players are trying to do. So after 22 overs in the run chase, England are 117 for 2. Brook and Jacks have just got to 50. The required rate is 6.5-ish. Australia bring on Stark. Conventional old school cricketing wisdom dictates you play out the gun bowler, you see through his 10 overs and you attack the rest. That is not what they did. They take 19 runs from his first over back into the attack. And actually, I think that's a vindication of what this team's trying to do. They're trying to play their cricket on the front foot. And I think there's a little bit of crossover of frustration towards a test team, and that's carrying over to people's frustration towards the ODI side. Because you look back at England's most successful one-day outfit ever, they did try and score 370 pretty much every time they went out to bat. So I thought it was very important on that level that they won in that way.
Yes, and it kind of backs up that again, Harry's comments were about the dressing room rather than about paying public. In that they would go out there and do the same thing again, but do it better. I mean, one thing that sort of struck me, particularly given this sort of like the relative inexperience of this England batting lineup in 50-over cricket, and the fact that all of their 50-over cricket is played internationally now and nowhere else, which is a subject for another day. that 50 over cricket to me is perhaps the most difficult format to kind of to judge or to get the balance right between the importance of wickets, losing wickets, having wickets in hand, and scoring rates. In T20 cricket, generally speaking, there's not enough time for the game to swing backwards and forwards enough for you to kind of have to worry too much about whether you get out or not. Clearly there are small moments at the back end of games, perhaps, but not very often. And in Test match cricket, you can take the decision if wickets have been lost and you're trying to rebuild. You can do that without any time pressure in terms of your scoring rate. In 50 over cricket, you have to make all of those judgments throughout the course of 50 overs. And this England batting lineup is, as I've said, very, very inexperienced in the format, let alone internationally. And it takes a little bit of time before that sort of game management, that knowledge of when is the right time to press, when is it important that we hold a little bit, when is is it absolutely critical that wickets being blown away left, right, and centre, trying to smash it out of the park is not a great idea. And all of these things need to be taken into calculation. And so I think that the 50 over game in itself is very, very exposing of that inexperience, particularly when your method is going to be, sound the bugle and charge from ball 1 to ball 50. A long old time to bat. And of course, India and Australia, the two sort of most recent sort of champions in the format, are played pretty much a Test match batting lineup in the format, which kind of backs up that point, whereby game management, yes, you need guys who can put the foot down, and yes, you want to be able to reach 350, 360 if you can. But more often than not, when conditions don't say that that's possible, then you have to be able to really read conditions, read the game, read risk, and play accordingly. So it's a tightrope that England are trying to walk at the moment on the back of sort of losing a lot of experienced players, having a lot of inexperienced players in, and trying to play sort of this gung-ho style of cricket, which I am not entirely sure that they are ready to do on a regular basis and be successful. They might be, given sort of 4 or 5 years, if they haven't annoyed everybody so much that they all get sacked. But at the moment, they're not quite ready to do it, and they might not be quite good enough to kind of play in a slightly more conservative way either. So you're going to get these fluctuations where they win a game with 10 overs to spare, or where they lose a game with 10 overs to spare, and there won't be a great deal in between.
The current squad leans closer to the T20I group than the Test squad, and that's partly a consequence of the schedule. Up until the end of this year, you almost have series overlapping, so it's been very difficult for the ODI side in the last couple, basically since the pandemic, to have their full strength side and have all the Test guys available. With that in mind, going forward, and bearing in mind that Brendan McCullum will oversee both groups, all 3 groups, from the start of 2025. Do you think they should be looking closer to the Test squad? You compare Australia, India, etc. I take Will Jacks as an example. Batted absolutely brilliantly last night. But he's in at 3. In the last decade, that's where Joe Root bats, that's where Virat Kohli bats, that's where Babar Azam bats. Very different type of players to Will Jacks. Yeah. Do you think England should be looking more to try and integrate guys from the Test squad, players like Crawley, players like Ollie Pope?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, the news out this morning on some of the wires is that Ben Stokes is thinking of making a comeback in the format, and that would kind of give you the ultimate sort of game manager, bolster that middle order in a way that none of the other names that you just mentioned would do anyway. And of course, with Duckett, who's obviously Test match opener, who again is learning very much on the job at the top of the order. Would you say that Ollie Pope has the, would you say Ollie Pope at number 3 would be as a Test match number 3 would do as good a job as Will Jacks at number 3 at the moment? I don't know. That's one for another day. But I know that they were very keen on Zach Crawley. Obviously he captained, didn't he, last year at the back end. And there might well come a time where there's a place for him in that 50 over squad. But at the moment, you look at England's lineup, and it's pretty experimental, isn't it? Obviously, there's no Butler around at the moment, and there are sort of one or two players who are just making their early bow, and they're playing like it, and that's so. I think that all bets are on. I don't think that there's any discounting anybody from this team at the moment.
And just finally, I wanted to ask you about ODI cricket more generally from a punter's point of view. It's still a really good and almost unrivaled day out for a fan. The crowds in these games, they've been so into it. Last night, the crowd up at Durham was clearly loving every minute of it. And as a fan, even though that it's sort of falling by the wayside a bit with T20 cricket becoming more prominent, Test cricket still seen as a pinnacle by most. ODI cricket has fallen by the wayside somewhat, but for the fan, you get a result, you see 100 overs of cricket. It's a really good day out that we should remind ourselves of.
Yeah, I think perhaps for the in-ground experience kind of beats the TV experience. Maybe, I don't know. I don't know if people would sort of sit and watch a game over 100 overs on their sofa in a way that they might do a T20 game. But I also think that perhaps England, Australia always, so you've got no issue there. You go into places where they don't see much men's international cricket, i.e. Durham, whatever. And also, it's a little bit of a way to say that we've had enough of all this short form cricket. It seems to have been wall to wall since January, whether in this country or anywhere else. And sometimes it's nicer just to kind of sit back and watch something unfold over a longer period of time. But yeah, I mean, look, as I've said, I think in terms of skill, I think there are so many facets to the 50 over game, because you have sort of scoring rates, economy rates. Wickets are incredibly important for on both sides, fielding and batting. It is a very nuanced game, and it has a multitude of ways of playing it. And when the two teams are good and the competition's good, and hopefully pitches are decent and the weather's half decent, then it is a great day out. Yeah.
Well, fingers crossed for Bristol on the 29th of September, where the international summer comes.
Yeah, they've had what, 3 on the bounce wiped out now, haven't they? So they could do with a bit of luck there.
Well, fingers crossed. Cheers for your time, Butch. Catch you next week. Australia are 2-0 up at the time of recording. In the first one, England squandered a very strong position in the opener before Travis Head did what Travis Head always does in the run chase, whacking a rapid, quick, unbeaten 150. In the second game, England were 5 down in the power play while chasing, and from then they didn't really have a chance. Ben, Harry Brook has been catching strays from a comment he made after the first game, where he said about the manner of some of the dismissals in the first game. 6 of England's wickets fell to part-time spin. We're out there to score runs. If you get caught somewhere on the boundary or in the field, then who cares? On another day, that could go for 6, so I'm not too fussed about that. Obviously, it was grabbing in the pitch, but another day, we hit them for 6. They hit a few in the air and they landed safely, so a little bit unlucky. We want to entertain, like I've said a few times. Obviously, we care, but if you get out trying to score runs, that's the way we want to play. Former England captain Alistair Cook said, those are comments that Brook might look back on and cringe at in years to come. What did you make of the reaction? Not just from Cook, but pretty much everyone.
Well, I think the reaction is kind of nonsense, basically. And I think because of that, it's quite interesting to dissect actually what's kind of going on here, because I think there's a bit of confusion between the rhetoric around the Test side and around the white ball side. Like, it's white ball cricket. At some point, you do need to try and hit boundaries and hit sixes. Otherwise, you're not going to win very many games. That is different in Test cricket, where there is an argument that you can just wait for a bad ball. You never have to move the game on. I think England they view that differently as well, but there is at least a defendable position to say in Test cricket you can just wait for your boundary opportunity. You can't do that in one-day cricket. You do sometimes have to try and hit sixes. Sometimes that will go wrong. So I think there's a bit of people being a bit frustrated about like the Test team and that seeping into this here. There's a bit of confusion there, but I think there's actually another thing that England players have started to say, which frustrates me a bit more, which is when they say, after they've been beaten, they say, well, we went out there and we did everything we wanted to do. And it's like, well, no, you that can't be true. Like you can push back on some things if you feel like you're getting some unfair criticism. If someone's saying you hit some sixes and you shouldn't have tried to do that, say, no, we have to try and hit sixes. But also say, yeah, look, we were beaten by a better team and we need to be better than we were, and we'll go and reflect and see where that is. Don't say, oh yeah, we actually played really, really well and we just happened to get smashed by Australia. Like, that's not great. And then the other thing as well is just that underlying feeling about these series that the people who are in the grounds really care. People who are watching on TV also still care because it's England-Australia, and that feeling sometimes that the players aren't as hurt as the fans are watching it. Like, it's England v Australia. It should really matter. And they just want to sense that from their players. They want to sense that it hurts a bit to get beaten. And I think that's maybe sometimes what's coming across. And, maybe that's just a bit of getting, lost in translation or something, because I'm sure England aren't happy being 2-0 down. And I'm sure that they, in partly Brook is probably out there defending his players, saying we did everything we wanted to do. And he doesn't want to seem like he's, throwing his players under the bus in his first series as captain, saying, we had a shocker in this department or something. But I think maybe that's more where the outrage is coming from, because on the face of it, a guy saying you have to try and hit boundaries sometimes in one-day cricket is so patently obvious that to criticise it is a bit mad to me.
Phil, you spoke to Brook recently for the upcoming magazine. What did you make of his comments, the criticism around that, and having spent a bit more time with Brook, what he's like as a character?
The sentiments probably maybe considered sounder than the choice of language. You can't say who cares, albeit it was a flippant and slightly throwaway remark, but you can't say that. And,
But he was talking about two different ways of getting out.
No, I know.
He's not saying we've lost to Australia, who cares? He's saying you get caught in the boundary versus nicking off.
Sure, but language is important, and Ben's right to highlight the contract between supporter and player. And there has been, it's a theme of the summer, theme of the international summer. How much does it matter? How much are these players really bleeding for the result? And while I don't think that there is an indifference at all in Brook or in this team, nonetheless, the choice of words was probably a bit clumsy in that instance. But the sentiment, I don't have an issue with particularly. Understand what he's trying to say. And it's not dissimilar to sentiments that have been expressed by Travis Head, who said something essentially similar to Ricky Ponting, as you talked about before the show. Him as a character, totally upfront, which is I guess consistent with that kind of expression, right? There is no side to him. There's no side to his game either, which is what makes him so compelling to watch, I think. But he can frustrate as well as beguile you, because he's still trying to find that perfect balance with his game. I think that also applies with some of his public statements. He doesn't say much, but when he does, you listen to it, and it's to the point, and you salute him for it overall, for sure. But now he's been thrust, perhaps not prematurely, but perhaps slightly quicker than he might have been expecting to. We spoke about that in the interview that I did with him before the Oval Test match, which appears as the cover story of the current issue of the magazine. And we spoke about how there's an onrush of responsibility. He was reluctant to describe his style of leadership because, firstly, it's a pompous question and he's not into any of that kind of nonsense, especially from a Southern journalist. Secondly, he's just getting going. Nonetheless, straight away, 2 weeks later, he is England captain. Life comes at you fast. And so now he is going to have to start considering the weight of the words and being slightly more diplomatic, and recognizing that when you are asking a lot of fans to keep coming with you, and a lot of fans paying through the nose at the gate, or paying for their digital subscriptions for Sky or whatever it might be, you want to see, as a fan, there's a natural impulse. You want to see a little bit more jeopardy at play. And there was perhaps an absence of some of that during the summer test series. And there's been an absence of that in these two games as well. But you can't ignore the context to it as well. It's the end of the summer. It's a slightly spurious series. There's not an enormous amount riding on it. It does have that sort of flimsiness to it, which is unavoidable. You might want to say more on this subject. What's more interesting to me about the one-day setup is how I don't disagree with I don't agree with the notion that it's basically just 20 overs times 1.5. I think there's a lot more daylight between the two games. And Owen Morgan has always kind of said this, that it's basically just a longer T20 game, and I think that's how they approach it.
But look at the actual 11s that people have now.
And that's where I would really take umbrage.
Well, look, if you look at the two teams that got to the World Cup final that were the two best teams at World Cup by a mile, the difference between India and Australia's 50 over sides and their test side isn't really that much. Just on what Head said. So Ricky Ponting, it's an interesting interview actually. Ponting and Atherton sort of ask Head about what's changed over the last 3 years, and Head is asked by Ponting, how did you go from being a fragile test cricketer to someone who dominates all three formats? Head said, I work extremely hard on my technique, and that coincided with not caring about how it looks when I get out, showing me a good dismissal that ever looks pretty. And I think the broader cricketing point of the criticism around England in that first game in particular. So when Duckett gets out for 95, England are 213 for 2 in the 33rd over. So England are scoring at 6.55 runs and over. Australia in that game scored 7.2. So at that point, England actually weren't scoring quick enough. It wasn't unreasonable for England to try and put their foot on the accelerator even further and try and get up to a 370, 380 score, because even 360 might not have been enough against Head on that day. And I also think that why people laid into Brook in that way is I think it's easier to blame something that sounds fixable. So like England's approach is something that could be fixed in theory. But the inconvenient truth is that this Australian team is so much better than England. So that 11 at Leeds for the second game, Australia had 8 guys who played in the World Cup final. England's leading ODI run scorer picked for that game was Adil Rashid. Australia have won 14 games on the bounce. The only side to do that in the history of men's ODI cricket is Ponting's Australia in 2003. So, I think that's why a lot of the blame was on England's attitude, because I don't think people like talking about the fact England are miles off Australia, and especially in that second game where you had Hazelwood, Stark, Marsh, and Maxwell all back in the side. That bowling attack in particular is so much ahead of what England have, even when Archer's available.
Yeah, the bowling attack that's true. I mean, but that's because Australia's is like a kind of a freak bowling attack. But actually, when you look at the batting lineup, I think it's a distance from England at its best. And this feeds into what Phil was saying actually about it being, is it an extended T20? Is it a shortened test match, I guess, especially having England play tests at the moment. And when you go back to that England side that won the 2019 World Cup, obviously their strike rates stand out. But you had a top 6, like everyone averaged 40. Several of them in that time span were averaging 50. And that's how you make totals of, like 350 is a lot of runs. You don't get there with guys who, average 30 to 35 and strike really quickly. That's not going to get you there.
It's striking to me that you would have Phil Salt, Will Jacks, and Liam Livingstone all in the top 6 of a 50 over side. For me, God, I went New Zealand for a minute. For mine, you'd have one, maybe 2 at a push if you're living a little and being a little bit wild and woolly. But to have 3 and 2 of them in your top 3, important point. Australia field, generally they field their test attack. Or they field...
And Zampa instead of line is basically what they field.
And Zampa's an extraordinary white ball bowler. But they also have 2 new balls as well, right? That's worth bearing in mind. And so across the first 15 overs, it's not lost its lacquer. It's 7.5 overs old, that new ball. It's not 15 overs old. And so you've got to respect the quality of the 6'5", 86 mile an hour seamer who hits the top of off stump with his eyes closed. You've got to respect the quality there. Now, it could well be that they want to find out about Jacks and they want to find out about Salt against good quality, real test match quality, and they might want to find out about them. But it's a big, big ask for players who are not defined by those kinds of virtues, right? Joe Root's been England's most reliable ODI player along with Butler for the last 10 years. There's a reason why, because technically he's rock solid.
The best 50 over players generally are guys who average 50, strike at 90 without seeming to take a risk. So like Root, Babar, Kohli, etc. They're so good at milking the middle overs and just going at sixes. And that's a skill that actually, even in the most talented young England players, we haven't really seen it yet. Even a Brook, even a Smith at this stage of their career, just not really seen it yet. Yeah. And that's potentially that they've not had a huge number of opportunities. But that's still a question mark that they've got to answer. And also another question, Ben, I'm interested to hear what you think on this. England's next generation of white ball players haven't played a lot of 50 over cricket, and that's obviously because 100 coincides with our domestic competition. But that's not necessarily a problem that is that unique to England. So Yashasvi Jaiswal, best young batter in the world, he's not played a 50 over game of cricket in nearly 2 years. Does England look like they're in more trouble than they actually are because they are the first big side, in inverted commas, to go through a regeneration of this scale? You look at India, they've still got Rohit, Kohli, etc., etc. Australia, they've barely changed their top 6 or 7 at all.
Yeah, possibly. I guess England's transition has happened kind of more abruptly, partly because of their all format demands. So you haven't been able to have, like, they basically kind of all gone at the same time. There's none of that top 6 from that ODI World Cup in 2019 are playing in this series. So,
but we might have Butler, Stokes,
you might have them back. But that's still an important part of it, I think, is when you're transitioning these guys in, you've got to have those guys who can sort of, have them under their wing, and sure, you win some games of cricket as well. It's another thing to build the confidence that way. So that's one aspect of it, is you're not actually having that kind of on-the-job tutelage. The other thing as well is that, Jaiswal, I think, will probably go okay when he gets to go in ODIs. And set point, India needs to just make that change right now. But let's not go into that.
One for the Patreon.
Yeah, exactly. But I think there's also a case where, like, England would, I think, basically they were overperforming into 2019 just because that was just a golden generation. Like, you could pick basically 2 international class 11s between English guys born between like 1988 and 1992, which just that doesn't happen. And so they were all at the peak at their exact same time for that tournament. And England just throughout their history have not produced quality at that regularity. And I think we're kind of seeing a bit of a regression to that now, where even these guys that are coming through, yes, they'll get a bit better with time. And there are some talented players there, but I don't think there is that exact same depth of talent that we maybe assumed there was because of just how good and how kind of freakish that group of players was, I think.
I'm slightly mindful just to extricate myself from Will Jack smashing 120 and about 70 balls late this afternoon.
He did play all right in the first game as well.
And he did, and this is what I wanted to say. He made a 60 and 50 something balls and batted nicely, really.
He's actually got a pretty good ODI record.
Yeah, so it's a gamble worth taking, I guess. It's a relatively free hit in this slightly peculiar, uneven series.
On things that have gone well this series, Ben Duckett has looked good so far. I think Matt Potts has looked really good. And I guess there's another subplot to this series, is that it's England playing Australia. You've got Ashes in a year's time. But England's set of seamers used for this series are all test seamers. These are all guys who are going to go to Pakistan, Jofra Archer aside, and we know that England want to get him back into the test fold as soon as possible. And I thought it was interesting to see Potts bowl as well as he did at Leeds. Bowling Smith was with a beauty. And Ben and I were talking before we started recording, Phil, about how Potts seems to have gone up another level compared to when we first saw him as an international.
He looks a bit stronger to me, a bit more muscular.
We reckon that his pace has gone up from 78 to 84, 85 to 82 to 87. And that's quite significant.
Yeah, got a Henry V haircut as well. So no, it's all promising stuff.
Save for the Patreon. Yeah.
And Cars as well. You always look at his figures, and he's always going at 7 and over. But then you look at the raw materials, and you think there's a lot to get behind. Archer is it's stirring that he came back for that first game. I think it was his first ODI since March 2023.
Yeah.
And Travis H was good afterwards. He said, "Look, Joff's too good for me." And he beat him 4 times in the first 11 deliveries that Travis Head faced. Beat him all ends up. But then, because Head's such a genius, this sort of mad, untrammeled, freewheeling hitter, freak player, he then went after Jofra. And so if you look at the cold hard stats, Jofra's first 4 overs went for 35, I think it was. But he could have got rid of the match winner 3 or 4 times in the first 20 minutes. And that's what he has. That's what he brings to you. The pace is good, by the way. It's not Steve Smith 2019 pace, but it's 89s, it's 90s. It's the pace is plenty good enough.
No, he's looked sharp. Nice moment for Adil Rashid, by the way. He became the 3rd Englishman to take 200 ODI wickets, doing so at his home ground in the second game. The first 2 bowlers to get to the landmark from England, Jimmy Anderson and Darren Gough. He also became the third quickest spinner to 200 ODI wickets after Saqlain Mushtaq and Shane Warne, doing it faster, quite a lot faster than Murali, for example. And good to hear Rashid say this week that he's not yet contemplating retirement. And I wonder if he's made a commitment behind closed doors, given that England haven't bothered with any young spinners. When last year, if you go back 12 months, Rahan Ahmed was picked in a few squads. He was picked in that Bangladesh tour at the start of 2023. Played West Indies away end of 2023. Tom Hartley was in squads. For these two series against Australia, where they're having a look at a lot of young players, they just haven't bothered with a young specialist spinner, which makes me think Rashid has said behind closed doors, "I'm here for the long haul," which is great.
It is great. I think they've managed him very well. The only fly in the ointment is the shoulder issue, but there's been no murmurs around that I've heard of in recent times. He doesn't play often. He doesn't carry any weight or anything like that, and so he's not going to fall away too much in the field. He's never been a particularly great fielder, but he's reliable enough on the boundary down at deep third or a fine leg. He can go on till the next World Cup, no doubt about it. He is those stats interesting. I find those interesting because I didn't know he was that good comparatively to other world spinners across the story of ODI cricket. He's one of my all-time favourite cricketers, and the longer he goes on and the more he demonstrates almost sort of trolls these sort of increasingly burly big muscle men hitters and just loops it over their eye line.
I think he's bowling slower.
Right, I think he's bowling...
There are balls that are like 43, 44 MPH, so he just didn't used to bowl.
Yeah, but he bowls like one of these sort of ancient club cricketers, with magic in their fingers, and he tosses it so high that about 4 or 5 different shots are played by, these big beasts, and in the end, all they can basically do is just vaguely put a bat down on it as it trickles back to him, and he picks it up, tosses it, goes again. He's an absolute joy, a real true beauty.
On Saqlain, his ODI record was totally insane. So by the end of the 99 World Cup, he had 204 ODI wickets at 19.66. He was 22 years old at the time. What happened, Phil?
Good question, actually.
He was. I put this in the WhatsApp group, but no one responded.
Well, I've got a couple of things on it. Well,
he went very well here at the Oval, right? So he became the key man either side of the turn of the century for Surrey.
But that is still sort of the period I'm talking about. So he is basically out of the picture by 2004, by which point he's 27. Yeah. And that includes Surrey.
Certainly in Test cricket, he started very strongly and then fell away. And for whatever reason, and I don't know the answers, but his Test match numbers fell away quite dramatically from the first part to the second part. And this is Pakistan cricket, right? So if you have a bad month, then you're forgotten about.
They started favouring Canary as well, didn't they? He was also a good international spinner.
Yeah, and he rather blotted his copybooks, to say the least. Yeah. But he was very good for his first 40-odd Test matches. Yeah. But the same thing happened to Mushtaq Ahmed, right? You look at Mushtaq Ahmed in county cricket, untouchable. In one-day cricket, sensational. But again, if you look at his Test career, it was a bit in and out, and maybe played 50 Test matches across a long period of time.
But Saqlain was properly done from international cricket at 27.
Yeah. So what ended his career in the end was the Indian Cricket League in 2008, which was the unsanctioned sort of competitor to the IPL.
That's 4 years after. That's 4 years after he last played for Pakistan.
The other thing I wonder about is the Doosra crackdown, possibly.
Yeah.
That was a big weapon for him, and no, I don't think there were any suggestions during his career that there was, doubts about his action, but I think a lot of players who used that stopped using it, and that was a bigger part of his armoury than for others. So I wonder if that had an impact as well.
That's the end of part 2. In part 3, we'll talk about Surrey's county championship win. You can discover the Rado Captain Cook high-tech ceramic Rado England Cricket Limited edition watch, a Swiss watchmaking technology masterpiece limited to 150 pieces that celebrates the collaboration of Swiss watch brand Rado and England cricket. Don't miss your chance to own this exceptional and unique timepiece. Visit the link in the description now to secure yours, or explore Rado's authorised retailers. Surrey have won the county championship for the third year in a row, the first side to do so since Yorkshire in the 1960s. They beat Durham at home while Somerset lost to Lancashire in Manchester to give Surrey the title in Alex Stewart's final year as director of cricket. Phil, we've watched Surrey more than anyone really this year.
Literally, more than Alex.
In a minute or so. Why have Surrey been so good?
Extraordinary squad depth, really. I think we worked out that they have 11 seamers on the books.
11 seamers were used in the championship.
This is the benchmark that all other teams now have to try and hit. If you can't develop a seam bowling battery of 8, 9, 10 quicks, then you're always going to be in the shadow of a club that just does things on a different scale to everyone else. There are 60-something thousand members across all 18 counties, paying members, and a third of them are members here at the Oval, and so they have immense financial heft and reach, but at the heart of it is a brilliantly run, pragmatically organised, cannily assembled squad that crucially they all pulled together. You saw that Tom Curran came back for 2 red ball games despite having retired 2 years ago. Sam Curran came immediately back into the team.
Will Jacks came in for just like one round.
And so sure, there's a lot of very highly regarded and well off and white ball classy cricketers in their setup, but when push comes to shove, if the boss taps them on the shoulder, then they're there to play. They're there in the whites on a Thursday morning, and you've seen that. You know, they've had to dig quite deep, and it's been far from a procession this year. And if Somerset hadn't ballsed up against Lancs, having beaten Surrey in that incredible game at Taunton, then it would still be ongoing into this final week. Again, Essex can count themselves perhaps slightly unfortunate. They let a couple slip through. We saw Durham with a scratch bowling side still push Surrey across 3.5 days. They'll be stronger next year. And so I'd hesitate to think that it's basically them and the rest.
There are 3 players I wanted to pick out to almost sum up why I think Surrey is so good. So Ryan Patel's one. So he doesn't make their team when everyone's available. At the start of the season when Surrey had a top 6 of all guys who have played or were about to play Test cricket, Patel didn't get in the team. He plays 2 of the most important innings of the year. It's called 100 against Essex when Surrey were in real trouble in what at the time looked like first versus second clash. To have that sort of talent on the bench and also keep them interested, you know, it'd be very tempting for a player like Patel to probably go to another county where he's first choice in all 3 formats, play every week. But they keep players like him involved and interested, and they contribute when the going gets tough, because their availability for games like Somerset last week is really, you know, they're missing best part of 10 players. And then the 2 main bowlers, Dan Worrell and Jordan Clark. Dan Worrell is one of the best bowlers in the country. No caveats. He bowls at really good pace, swings the ball throughout an innings, averages something like 16 with a ball in the championship this year. His Surrey record is comparable to Surrey greats, overseas greats, Morne Morcourt and Wakar Yunus, and tantalisingly qualifies for England next year and says he's up for it.
Where do you 2 stand on that? And before you answer, I agree with everything you say about him. He is a world-class bowler. He is also 33, so for how long he can be at that level, but he is a world-class bowler. He's not just the best in county cricket. Honestly, he is outrageous. So he walks into that team. If that team is picked tomorrow, he walks into that squad. But should he?
Well, I think, yeah. I mean, you know, English cricket's got a rich history of getting guys in straight away after they qualify for playing for England. And Dan Worrell is someone who, interestingly, given that he's Australian, I think there'll be a lot of people saying, oh, he'd be great for the Ashes. But his style of bowling is so suited to in England with the Duke's ball. I'm not saying he wouldn't be able to have success overseas, but I think, you know, I think he's like Woke's level in England potentially with the ball. And I think on merit, 100% gets into England's best squad for the first Test of the summer next year against Zimbabwe.
But should he?
Yeah, I said right. Yeah. I mean,
Ben.
Yeah, I think so. So you're talking about the argument that because he played for Australia first, basically, that he shouldn't.
That he's a 33-year-old Australian.
Which is the aspect that he's 33 or that he's Australian?
Well, just answer the question.
Yeah, I would be fine with it, and I understand people who have an issue with it and say that international cricket is, about testing cricketing cultures. But in some ways, Worrell, he is a product of the English system in some ways. Like, I know he wanted to play for Australia a while ago, but now he's come over. He's embedded in the English game, more than some other guys England have picked at certain times. So, what
does that mean? Sorry,
I almost feel like it'd be different if he'd just been maybe like somehow fulfilling a residential criterion, but had been, out there playing lots of like T20 leagues and not being like part of the English game somehow. Like, it feels like he is a guy who's come through the county championship, and like, it's not like when Surrey signed him to begin with, he was a guy who came with, a huge reputation. He has kind of got better through the county championship. And so in some ways, I think the English game can sort of take credit for how good Worrell is now. It's not like they have just plucked some guy who by some freak of nature happened to qualify. Well, not freak of nature, but some freak of heritage happened to qualify for England. I take it that you wouldn't be so happy with it from how you...
How dare you put words in my mouth?
No, I'm asking.
No, let's just move on. I'm just interested.
No, let's move on. Go on. You got to answer if you ask us to.
I wouldn't want to see him in an England Test team.
Why?
Because he's a 33-year-old Australian, and his Australianness is such that I would prefer to see a young English bowler in that position, even if that young English bowler is not quite to the same degree. If English cricket can produce anything, it can produce good seam bowlers, and while he would be the best of them all, I'm looking to that spectacle, and I would feel uneasy with an Australian seamer running in and nicking off whoever it may be who's opening the batting for Australia next time. And I know that probably makes me sound incredibly parochial and small-minded and all the rest of it, and I totally understand your arguments. But I do think there is something, you kind of dismissed it a bit, but I think there is something where you are, where you've made your grounding, where you have developed your game, what culture you emanate from. He's already played international cricket for Australia, and I would be uneasy. I would be uneasy from a fan's point of view. Yeah. I would be uneasy because there would never be any sense that he is a naturalised Englishman. He'd always be an Australian who's playing in English cricket.
So just to understand what you're saying, it would be different if Dan Worrell comes to England age 20 and having played
Sam Robson, for example.
I think if you've essentially moved from youthhood to adulthood in that cricketing culture, then I don't have any real concerns with it. But I think if you
come age 28,
if you come here age 28, say like the Simon Harmer kind of scenario, and your country is playing Test cricket, it's not like you're boycotted or you're behind or whatever, and you have other avenues into Test cricket, but instead you're taking that route and you emerge as a fully formed, mature cricketer anyway into English cricket, then for me, you embrace it. You embrace them because they raise the quality. You celebrate them. You glory in what they give the English game, but you don't pick them in the Test team.
Interesting. I'm sure that's a debate that we'll have in the months to come. Just finally on that Surrey-Durham game, Durham had a extremely exciting young debutant, James Minto, 16 years old, left arm properly quick. He was not very tall. He looks 16. And he bowled 85 miles per hour, genuinely. The second youngest seamer to take a wicket in the championship since 1955. Obviously very early on, but that is a name to watch in the years to come. On Surrey, Jenny asked a question that sort of relates to, Phil, when you talk about building a battalion of 11 seamers, there'll be people listening to this being like, hang on, my county can't do that. So Jenny asks, as they head to an almost inevitable third championship, which they now obviously have, I want to raise the issue of Surrey's dominance in the championship in recent years. It seems to get skirted around by the cricket media, but not properly addressed. Yes, Somerset pushed them close this year, but I don't think it's okay for the assumption to be that Surrey wins and it's an exciting treat if someone gives them some competition. The ICEC report highlighted the issue of private schooling in cricket, and Surrey's dominance in the championship and England squad seems to me to be evidence of this, given the plethora of private schools in the area. What actions are being taken to address this in light of the ICEC EC report?
Brilliant question. From Jenny.
Yeah, from Jenny. I don't know who wants to go first.
Go on, Ben.
No, I mean, she's dead right, and I think in some ways it feels harsh to point that at Surrey. I think I think it's entirely fair to say it would be nice if other teams won the county championship, but all Surrey can do is to use the resource available to them and to be the best team they can be. They can also do stuff to bring cricket into to those communities and social classes where it has been deprived from, and they are doing some of their bit. The ACE program, which obviously has the close ties to Surrey, is addressing a related problem, I guess. But equally, there is still obviously so much more work to be done with given that cricket is increasingly a sport that is only for certain people in this country, which is a shame. And we talk about that in other aspects on this podcast. We talk about ticket prices. You talk about you see that there's so many other aspects you can get into with it. I suppose what the ECB would say that there is a when they in their response to the ICUC report, they said they were going to be launching action plans on various aspects that were raised in it. One of those was I think a working class action plan, and that is due to be published in October. There was an interview with Ed Balls, who's part of putting that together. That was done by Lizzie Ammon in the Times, where he talks a bit about that, about why he feels strongly about it. But that's, I guess we'll dissect that when it comes. But then also you look at, some other action plans in the past been published. Like you look at, say a South Asian action plan that came, I think, in 2017. And then you look at the difference between what that comes with, with all the heft behind a governing body and that sort of thing. And then you look at what Saka was able to do with, with basically like 50 grand's worth of budget to get like all these guys back into the game when they'd been kind of like jettisoned from it. And you think I think it's right that we should really inspect that closely when it comes out and view it with some skepticism, because I think the track record, even when these people have had good intentions, has been that they haven't always hit the mark. So, but and sorry, they are a big part of the English game, and they have a part to play as well, and they are doing some of it, and in some ways it's not their fault. And actually, Jenny mentioned Somerset pushing them close, and Somerset are in some ways benefiting from the same sort of phenomenon. Like so many of their young cricketers, and that's been their key thing this year, is their young cricketers come from Millfield School and from King's College Taunton, which are two of the best cricketing schools in the country. And why wouldn't Somerset go to those and get the brilliant cricketers that they produce? But that's still an issue, that it's two schools that basically mean that we have a team on the verge of a treble.
Yeah, I think two things to say to Jenny's question and top of what Ben said is, one, obviously Surrey have won it 3 years in a row, but I do think it has actually been very close. Every year I don't actually expect Surrey to win it despite their squad. I think Somerset, Essex, Hampshire and Durham, for example, I think all have the tools to win a title next year. But it's, obviously a broader fair point. And, if cricket is not being played in state schools anywhere near as much as it used to, if it's not on free-to-air television, obviously you have a massive advantage if you have loads of private schools in your area. And I just had a look today. So even discounting the South London area that obviously has loads of private schools in it, Surrey, the county itself, has something like triple the number of private schools than Lancashire, the county. So, you're comparing two big test match ground counties with 100 teams as well. Surrey have a way bigger pool there than even a county like Lancashire does.
This is only on the micro level, but Surrey have also recruited Worrell, Jordan Clark, Cameron Steele from out of town.
Dan
Lawrence as well. I was thinking about cricketers who haven't torn it up necessarily. Lawrence probably would have been someone that most people were after, but then Dan Worrell, a lot of people would have been after him. But they have recruited very well as well. There's also the point about the salary cap as well. Now, sure, a lot of counties can't hit that salary cap, so it's moot for certain counties. But it's not like Surrey have limitless funds that they can spunk all over the place. So there have been efforts to try and control the amount that can be paid out to your first team squad, at least. So Surrey do benefit, if that's the right term, from, as you say, being, you know, a posh county. There's a lot of fee-paying school money flowing around, and when I interviewed Alex Stewart about this a few years ago, and I asked him, because I think the previous 5 England debutants had all been from private education, including Ollie Pope. This was about 2018. And he said, and I've said it on the podcast before, but, you know, he said, well, it proves that the system is working. And from his point of view, he was essentially saying, well, we identify them young, they go through our pathway, and then they have the finishing school of being one of the key schools that has a housemaster that is probably an ex-Surrey pro. And so they have everything in their favour. And it's not Surrey's fault that cricket's not played in state schools. And so you can't fashion those kinds of cricketers, because you have to find them elsewhere. You find them instead through clubs. You find them through families. There's an interesting sub-element of all of this regarding the number of cricketers that come from cricket families, cricket dynasties. The point about elitism in cricket is that it's structural and institutional, I think. And the ICEC report acknowledged that. And the question of our time and the question for our game is how that becomes less so. And that's a huge, huge question. Certain counties can do more, for sure. Certain counties are already doing good things. Glamorgan is perhaps if you're talking about its socioeconomic reality, the catchment area of Glamorgan, geographically huge, the only obviously first-class county in Wales. Speaking to Mark Wallace, who was director of cricket there recently, their catchment area is about 3 hours drive from one side to the other. So it's a huge geographical area. It's very hard to maintain coherence with the different elements of the cricket board across that vast area. Nonetheless, they have essentially removed additional costs to parents to allow their kids to come through the pathway. And so while I can't be 100% sure that it's free, in most cases, it's heavily subsidized stroke free. But there was another example on the other end of the scale, which I think was actually in Sussex, although don't quote me on that, where in the ICC report, they spoke to a set of parents who had 2 children in their pathway, and it cost them £7,000 to get there, with all the additional costs, the travel costs, the kit, getting to and from, etc., etc. I've got it here, actually. In statistical analysis, the report focuses on pathways and costs, with one parent reporting it costs more than £7,000 a year to keep 2 daughters in the system in terms of lost work and costs. That may not be Sussex, forget it. That might be misremembered. The point is that story won't be that uncommon. One of the big recommendations was that participation in talent pathways should be made free of direct costs charged by counties. That's where counties can do a lot of good work here. In the absence of there being a governmental shift in attitudes towards getting more cricket in state schools, and you never know, Ed Balls, ITV's Ed Balls, whose wife is now part of the front bench again, you never know. One thing on that, as one aside, Sunak's, if you like, one of his parting gifts to Chance to Shine, 35 million, I think it was. Evidently, when you're an almost certainly outgoing Prime Minister, you tend to drop some gifts at projects that are of particular interest to that person. Sunak likes his cricket. Sunak gave some money to Chance to Shine. We all know what Chance to Shine does, and does amazing work day by day.
And there's a specific money as well. This is to build indoor cricket centres in inner cities, right?
Exactly. So indoor cricket hubs in various urban areas up and down the country. There's already some. There needs to be lots more. The work that they're doing, honestly, it's not just because it's cute and fluffy. The work that they do is tremendous, and I've seen it firsthand. If that money is, apparently it's now under review, that funding, if that money is reversed or limited, then that would be a pretty dark day for the game. And this is not a party political point. Anyone who listens to this probably knows I don't vote Tory, but that would be a devastating result. And I know that Chance to Shine are proceeding on the assumption that money will still be coming into them. But if it doesn't, that's a terrible kick in the balls for the game.
That's the end of part 3. In part 4, we'll talk more about county cricket, some international stuff, and the new Wisden Cricket Monthly. So Somerset fell short against Lancashire in an excellent game. 21 wickets fell on the first day before Lancs batted all day on day 2 and a fair bit on day 3 as well, to leave Somerset needing too many. It's a huge result to the bottom of the table as well as the top. It just about keeps Lancs' hopes of survival alive. They're 15 points behind Notts. Lancs play Worcestershire in the last round of fixtures. Nottinghamshire are at home to Warwickshire. There were some punchy quotes this week from Lancashire's chief executive, Dan Gidney, effectively blaming agents for high-profile players not playing in the Championship this season. He said, "We need to have more of an open conversation. Coaches get blamed, administrators get blamed. But if you want to blame anybody, blame the agents. I think the game as a whole needs to come together to find a way to support the Championship. England players don't have to play in the Championship. Agents don't care about the Championship. More prize money would help. And I think we need to find a way of paying 4 or 5 players a lot more money. Instead of £80,000 to £90,000 being the top domestic salary, we need to find a way of paying 200k and saying that part of that deal is that you don't play franchise cricket. I think 4 or 5 players at Lancashire won't play Championship cricket. There are some whose bodies genuinely can't handle it, and there are others who are making a choice." Pretty punchy stuff, I thought. When I was looking through the squad list, a couple of Lancs players probably stand out. So Luke Wood, for example, hasn't played in the Championship this year. He's currently with the Bangla Tigers in the Zim Afro T10. And Liam Livingston hasn't played in the Championship at all this year. Obviously, a very busy player, but we compared him to someone like Will Jacks or Sam Curran, who make themselves available for the odd week that they are free. Gidney's obviously deflecting some blame there. Lancashire, their squad building hasn't been up to scratch, really. I don't think they're missing that many players, but broadly speaking, do you think he's got a fair point?
First, if we're dealing quick with Lancashire, also the coach as well. It looks increasingly odd, that appointment to give Dale Benkenstein, who had a modest record at Gloucestershire, to give him one of the biggest jobs in the country. And there have been some odd, selections. Rocky Flintoff at 4, obviously he's a very talented young player, but to have him as a county championship number
basically
4,
unheard of to have a 16-year-old at 4.
Yeah. So there's that sort of things. On the agent side of things, he does have a point, but I think were you to ask an agent, they would say, well, my job is to get my player as much money as possible, and also in some ways have them have to do as little work as possible for that. And if the contracts that they have signed with counties don't bar them from going to these things, well, I'd be negligent in my job if I wasn't trying to get them a bit more money here and there. And other counties, we talked about Surrey already, but they have a policy of not letting their players sign last minute IPL deals. They also make it clear to players, you have this is your home for 11 months of the year, and we expect some stuff in return. In some ways, I think county cricket is probably operating a lot of good faith, where there's kind of that relationship has been implicit, and agents have seen the chance to say, okay, well, actually, we're going to just look at what's written down and make my guys a bit more money because of that. And now I think counties probably need to just take that other step, which is in some ways a shame that you lose that sort of that I don't know, maybe fraternal relationship there, that kind of, and that counties just need to say, write it into it, saying this is exactly what being a Lancashire player means. It means you don't get to sign this thing, means you do get to play this thing, and that is just the deal. The tricky thing as well is those 200k players. I mean, I don't think Luke Wood would quite be one of those if you're doing that 4 or 5 players country. I'm not sure Liam Livingston would. It's that, like, in some ways, you look at it, it's like it's not affecting absolutely loads of players who are going away and playing loads of stuff during the season. There is a bit of a cost here, but I also think there are ways that counties can write it into contracts too.
Yeah, I think these things. It's worth saying that I really do think that whilst he's making a fair point, Lancashire's squad construction is poor for a Division 1 county. You look at the number of players they're missing. They're not missing lots, and they've got a teenager opening the batting, Rocky Flintoff at 4, who, as you say, very talented, but he's only 16 years old. Their overseas signings haven't worked. Tom Bruce, the New Zealander, barely scored a run. Venkatesh Iyer, cynically,
There's a cynical appointment.
This is a guy who barely has played first class cricket. He's in his late 20s. Is he the ideal person to get in for a county championship run-in? Probably not. So I think they've got to look at themselves a bit as well. They shouldn't have been in this position that they found themselves in. And I think as well, just like looking at their squad list, I think there's perhaps exaggeration in the number of players that's affecting.
I think that's all fair. It's a crisis club, Lanks. The atmosphere is pretty restive among the natives, to say the least. And I'd be shocked if there aren't some significant changes in personnel at the top as they try and digest what's looking likely to be Division 2 next year.
Elsewhere, Kent are down and Sussex are up. And in the Division 2 promotion race, it's between Yorkshire and Middlesex for that second spot. Yorkshire start the final round 15 points ahead of Middlesex. Yorkshire play Northants at home. Middlesex are away to Sussex, who, having already secured promotion, may already be on the beach.
I'll give you it. It's fine.
Glamorgan won the One Day Cup on Monday for the second time in 4 years after a miserably damp couple of days in Nottingham. Phil, you and Jeffers didn't make the trip up at the end.
It was going to be me, Jeffers, Gregors, and Matt Thacker. We bought our tickets.
You can arrange a five-a-side game.
We bought our tickets. So we're 60 quid out of pocket for the trains. I didn't buy my actual ticket for the game, but we got some tickets, and I was going to do the punter thing. I was bang up for it, and the weather just got more and more apocalyptic the more we looked at it across the course of the week. And so late on Saturday, in fact early hours of Sunday, we were on the WhatsApps saying, shall we? And then we decided not to, no. And it was probably a right move, because that was a pretty dank and miserable Sunday. Remarkably, they did manage to get a game in.
Extraordinary. Amazing common sense.
Yeah.
It's one of the best bits of common sense the game has shown ever.
Let's have a 20 over bash.
Yeah. So, and I don't know if people got the chance to watch it, but
I did. I loved it.
But it was you could clearly see it was raining the entire time. It was so dark. It was miserable.
It was amazing.
And great result for Glamorgan. Ben, Jeb with a knock from Sam Northeast to get them up to a proper total.
It was a good game of cricket. Obviously a very weird final, but just about befitting of one. Obviously way better to do this than to have it shared, and to have Somerset's to search for a domestic treble ending as a domestic half. A good game of cricket that went back and forth. Glamorgan, they've got an ambidextrous spinner. That's fun to see. Somerset back the guys who had got them there, not going back to their guys who were in the 100, despite being one of the counties most affected by that. But that meant that because they were trusting those guys, they picked Jack Leach even though they didn't really want to. So they picked him, then didn't bowl him, and then actually Glamorgan spinners kind of went okay. But it looked like like Somerset might pull off a high Sean Dixon, sort of the unlikely hero of their end of the season,
and Archie Vaughan as well.
There. Yes, yeah.
Bob asks one for the next pod: can we talk about how good Test cricket that doesn't involve India, England, and Australia is at the moment? Yes, we had a cracking test between New Zealand and Sri Lanka in Gaul. Sri Lanka winning by 63 runs. Kamindu Mendis scored yet another 100, his fourth in 7 tests, but this time up in his new spot as high as 5 after being at 7 and sometimes even 8 during the England series. Prabhat Jayasuriya took 9 in the game. Rachin Ravindra scored 92 in the 4th innings to keep the Kiwis interested. Sri Lanka going well at the moment, currently 3rd in the World Test Championship table. India beat Bangladesh after an early scare. The Bangladesh seamers initially had India 34 for 3, but a massive Jadeja Ashwin stand got India up to a big total that Bangladesh never really recovered from. Ashwin tonned up in the first innings and took a second innings 6 with the ball.
More tons than Flintoff.
And Afghanistan beat South Africa 2-1 in an ODI series in the UAE. Rahmanullah Gurbaz and Rashid Khan both had excellent series. Ben, you got 10 seconds to tell us the Rahmanullah Gurbaz stat.
He is the ODI cricketer. In history, no ODI cricketer has a bigger differential between their first innings average and their second innings average than him.
Ballpark, what are we talking?
Is about 55 first innings, under 20 second innings. So he's got more than 3 times his second innings average in the first innings.
2 bits of news from the cricket regulator. The cricket regulator and the Cricket Discipline Commission have had busy weeks. So Heather Knight was fined £1,000 for a historic photo of her in blackface. The photo was taken in 2012. She has issued a full and sincere apology. She said, "I'm truly sorry for the mistake I made in 2012. It was wrong and I've long regretted it. Back then, I simply was not as educated to the implications and consequences of my actions as I have become since. There was no ill intent meant." And Essex have been fined £100,000, half of that suspended for 2 years, by the Cricket Discipline Commission for admitting to the systemic use of racist language at the club from 2001 to 2010, which they failed to address. Finally, Phil, there is a new magazine out. It is already out. What is in it?
There you go. For our viewers, it's Harry Brook with me, as discussed. There is a very moving piece by Rob Smythe of The Guardian, who's become one of our stars, about Graham Thorpe, the understated greatness of Graham Thorpe, looking at where he really left his mark on the pitch. But throughout it, and Rob does this so well, he writes about the statistical nature of cricket, but he does it with great compassion and heart, and he pulls that off beautifully. Mel Farrell sat down with Adam Hollyoake, discussed again, actually, the Thorpe legacy and the nature of grief. Obviously, he's experienced more than enough of it. Searingly honest as ever is Hollyoake, and Mel does a really beautiful job with him there. We obviously round up all of the county stories as well. So as we approach the business end, the back end of the English summer, Joe has done a pretty definitive preview of the Women's T20 World Cup, speaking to a couple of England's 4-pronged spin attack, reviewed every team in it as well. And perhaps my favourite is the Rogues Gallery, Cricket's Rogues Gallery. It's kind of like a bit of a throwback article, this, in these sort of hyper-tense times. I wasn't even sure if we were allowed to do it, but we did.
So what is it?
Well, cricket. I'll read you the intro, because it was inspired by a book review on Bill Edrich. Right now, Bill Edrich is reviewed in this issue by John Houghton, our reviews editor, and Bill Edrich, who was a pretty sort of sturdy, stodgy, all-rounder, batting all-rounder for Middlesex.
But ages ago.
Yeah, either side of the Second World War, but was also an absolute rascal. Like the rascal's rascal. And inspired by the review of Bill Edrich, John Houghton and I decided to draw up our own rogues gallery of cricketing rapscallions, rascals, roisterers, and downright wrong-uns. From Shane Warne to Wally Hammond to Adrian Shankar, remember him, to Lord Frederick Beauclerk. Heard of him?
Never even heard of him.
Nor had I. He made 170 for the MCC in 1826. Never allowed his duties to interfere materially with the claim. No, that's boring, that bit. Yeah, he was a pretend vicar, Lord Frederick Beauclerk. His sermons were legendarily dull, which was crafty cover for his income of £600 a year from playing in and gambling on matches. He was known to dangle a gold watch from his stumps to imply that his defence was impregnable. Godfrey Evans, Freddie Truman, Umar Akmal, Herschel Gibbs, Honourable Lionel Tennyson, grandson of poet laureate Alfred.
Has it been a busy month for the lawyers?
I think we're okay, but it only came out a few days ago, and no news is very much good news. And Shakib Al Hassan makes his mark. Smirking miscreant. Charge sheet. Deep breath. Fined by his own board for grabbing his crotch on camera as commentators discussed his dismissal in an ODI, quitting international cricket via text message after being reprimanded for missing a team training camp, verbally abusing a domestic umpire when an appeal against teammate Mushfiqur Rahim was turned down, uprooting the stumps for similar reasons in the BPL, banned by the ICC for 2 years in 2019 with 1 year suspended for failing to report corrupt approaches, some from the IPL, timing out Sri Lanka's Angelo Matthews in a World Cup. Quote from Matthews, "I've never seen a team or a player stoop so low." And we didn't mention the murder charge that was landed on his shoulders last month. We left that one alone. And perhaps we need to leave that last little bit out alone. But anyway, John Otten and I had some fun putting all that together. So yeah, it's one of those magazines, really. All the fun of the fair yet again. It's it was just one of the magazines. There you go.
Well, as always, you can get the magazine through the link in our description. That is everything for today's show. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Ben. This has been the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast. Get the magazine, get involved in the Patreon. Would love to have you involved. See you later in the week.